There are moments in life when silence speaks louder than words, like the day a police dog refused to move from a little girl's side, even when everyone else had given up on her story. You see, this isn't just another tale about justice. It's about instinct, loyalty, and how one German shepherd's heart led to the truth no one else could find. A moment that proved, sometimes, it's not the humans who save the day. I've spent years studying emotional storytelling and real-life cases of K9 heroes, and what you're about to see isn't fiction. It's what happens when love, courage, and trust collide in the most unexpected way. Because at its core, this isn't about crime. It's about connection. The kind that makes you look at your own dog differently and realize they've been understanding you all along. Stay with me till the end, and you'll see why this story changed the way thousands of people view loyalty, healing, and what it truly means to be seen by an animal. This is more than a story. It's a reminder that sometimes the smallest heartbeat can carry the biggest truth. The room was quiet, too quiet for a place meant to comfort a child. Pale light leaked through the blinds, striping the walls with faint shadows. On the small round table sat a mug of cocoa gone cold, a coloring book, and a few soft toys arranged with careful intention, an illusion of safety. Yet the air held tension, the kind that made even the plush animals seem to hold their breath. At the center of it all sat a 6-year-old girl, small enough that her legs didn't reach the floor. Her thin fingers gripped an old, worn-out plush rabbit, one ear missing, one button eye dangling by a thread. Her name was Lila, though no one in the room dared say it too often. Each time they did, she flinched, as if the sound itself carried a memory she didn't want to recall. Across from her, Detective Ethan Cole crouched down to her level. The man was in his 40s, with hair just beginning to gray at the temples, and eyes that spoke of too many cases that ended without closure. The lines on his face were not from anger, but exhaustion. The quiet kind that came from years of watching good people break under bad truths. His voice was low, steady, the kind used by men who understood that shouting never built trust. "Hey there, Lila," he began, resting his elbows on his knees, palms open in front of him. "I'm Ethan. I'm not here to scare you. I just want to understand what happened. You can tell me anything, all right?" Lila didn't answer. Her gaze was locked on the plush rabbit's torn ear. She traced the stitching over and over, as if that small rhythm could keep her anchored. From behind the one-way glass, several adults watched, a prosecutor, a social worker, and 2 officers. Their murmurs were faint, like the rustle of leaves. Ethan could feel their judgment through the glass, even if he couldn't hear their words. He tried again, softer. "You remember that night, don't you? Pitch first." Lila nodded, barely. "Can you tell me what he looked like?" She hesitated, chewing on her lower lip. "He wore blue." "Blue, okay. Like a jacket?" She frowned. "No. Maybe gray." Ethan's brow furrowed, but he forced a calm smile. "That's okay, Lila. Sometimes colors look different at night." Behind the glass, the prosecutor sighed, shaking her head. The defense attorney smirked, the kind of smile that said, "See, the kid's useless." Ethan ignored them. He had seen this before. Trauma clouding memory, fear rewriting truth. But something about Lila was different. Her contradictions weren't confusion. They were protection. She wasn't lost. She was guarding something. He leaned forward slightly. "Was he someone you knew?" The question hung in the air. The clock ticked twice. Lila's eyes darted to the door, then down to her toy. Ethan softened his voice further. "It's okay. You're safe here. Nobody can hurt you." Her lips trembled. "He told me not to tell." Ethan froze. The words were faint, fragile, like glass about to break. He could almost feel the ripple of energy behind the glass wall as the prosecutor straightened, the defense's smirk fading. "Who told you that, Lila?" he asked gently. But the girl had already retreated. Her fingers clutched the toy so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Tears filled her eyes, not spilling, just trembling there, caught between fear and release. She shook her head violently. "I don't remember," she whispered, voice trembling. Ethan's chest tightened. He knew that tone. It wasn't lying. It was survival. He took a slow breath, forcing the tension from his shoulders. "All right," he said quietly. "You did really well today. Thank you for being brave." He stood, gesturing toward the social worker waiting outside. As the door opened, the light from the hallway spilled in, warm and golden, almost too gentle for a place so cold. Lila slid off her chair, still hugging the toy to her chest like a shield. As she passed Ethan, he knelt once more, meeting her eyes. "Hey," he said softly. "You don't have to be scared anymore." For the first time, she looked up at him. Really looked. Her eyes were wide, glistening, filled with something far deeper than fear. It was a kind of exhaustion only seen in those who had been carrying a secret too heavy for their small hearts. She gave the smallest nod, then slipped her hand into the social worker's and disappeared through the door. The room fell silent again. Ethan stayed kneeling for a long moment, staring at the half-empty mug of cocoa. He could still hear her voice echoing in his mind. "He told me not to tell." Behind the glass, the prosecutor murmured something into her recorder. "Witness testimony remains inconsistent. Further sessions recommended." The defense attorney chuckled, gathering his papers. "That's it? A kid with a stuffed rabbit?" Ethan rose slowly, his back aching. He didn't look at them. He didn't need to. He knew what they saw, a dead end. But he also knew what he saw, the flicker of truth buried under fear. He reached for the small recorder on the table and clicked it off. The mechanical click echoed louder than expected. Then, almost as an afterthought, he glanced toward the corner of the room, where his German shepherd, Rex, lay silently. The dog had been trained to stay still, to read emotion, to protect. Now his golden eyes were fixed on the chair where Lila had been sitting. His ears twitched once. Ethan crouched down, rubbing the dog's neck. "You felt that too, huh, boy?" Rex gave a soft whine, leaning into his hand. Ethan sighed, rubbing his temple. "There's more to this, isn't there? She's not lying." From behind the glass, he could sense the others leaving, the shuffle of footsteps, the closing of files, the whisper of bureaucracy moving on. But Ethan didn't move. He just stayed there with Rex, the dim light flickering against the steel table, the air heavy with unspoken things. He glanced once more at the empty chair, the small handprints on the cocoa mug, the faint smell of lavender shampoo that lingered where Lila had been. It all felt like a shadow of something fragile, something barely holding together. Ethan's hand stilled on Rex's fur. "She's scared of something she can't even name," he murmured. "And I think whoever told her not to tell meant it." Rex looked up, eyes glinting in the light. In that stillness, Ethan made himself a silent promise. Not the kind written in reports, but the kind that burrows into a man's heart. He would find out what haunted that little girl, no matter how deep the truth was buried, no matter who wanted it to stay hidden. Outside, thunder rolled faintly, a low, distant growl like a warning. Inside, Ethan straightened his back, eyes steady, hand resting on Rex's head. The case was only beginning. The station was nearly empty that night. Rain streaked down the tall glass windows, blurring the lights of the city into wavering ribbons of gold. Inside, the hum of the fluorescent bulbs was the only sound. That, and the occasional groan of thunder rolling somewhere far beyond the precinct walls. Detective Ethan Cole sat alone in the observation room, the glow of a monitor flickering across his face. On the screen, the grainy black and white footage replayed endlessly. The little girl sitting at the table, clutching her rabbit, eyes darting toward the door. The same scene, the same trembling voice. He told me not to tell. Ethan rewound it again, pressing play, his thumb resting on the spacebar like it was the only thing keeping him steady. He watched every frame, the way her fingers twisted the fabric of the toy, how her gaze avoided his when he asked the hard questions. The world saw contradictions, but to him it looked like fear, pure, undiluted fear. A soft exhale sounded beside him. Rex, his German shepherd partner, lay curled on the cold tile floor, head resting between his paws. The dog's eyes were half closed but alert, always listening. His ears flicked each time thunder rumbled outside. Ethan sighed, leaning back in his chair. "What do you think, boy?" His voice was rough, carrying that mixture of exhaustion and quiet despair that came from too many late nights with too few answers. "Maybe I'm losing it. Maybe she's making it all up." Rex lifted his head, brown eyes glinting under the screen's light. The dog didn't move, didn't bark, just stared. Then, with a deliberate slowness, he stood, patted closer, and rested a paw gently on Ethan's knee. The gesture, so simple yet steady, broke through the fog of doubt for a moment. Ethan chuckled under his breath, the sound bitter. "You think she's telling the truth too, huh? Times simums." Rex tilted his head, the way dogs do when they're listening. But Ethan knew better. Rex wasn't just listening, he was feeling. Police K9s were trained to sense stress, emotion, tension. But Rex had gone beyond training long ago. The bond between them was something that didn't need words. Ethan rubbed the dog's head absently, eyes never leaving the footage. "I've been wrong before," he murmured. "I've trusted people who didn't deserve it. Lost people because I didn't see what was right in front of me." The screen replayed the moment when Lila said, "He told me not to tell." Ethan's heart clenched every time he heard it. That voice, small, trembling, but carrying the weight of something unspeakable, it haunted him. Thunder cracked closer this time, making the window shudder. A second later, the phone on his desk rang, sharp and sudden in the quiet. He picked it up. "Cole." The prosecutor's voice came through, curt and cold. "Ethan, we're reviewing the file again. There's nothing solid. The child's statements contradict themselves. No corroborating evidence, no physical proof. The DA's office is considering dropping the case." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You can't just drop it. She's 6 years old. Of course she's scared." "I understand that," the prosecutor replied, though her tone suggested otherwise. "But feelings aren't evidence. The defense is already mocking the case. Without something concrete, this won't hold up." Ethan stared at the monitor, where the little girl's frightened face was frozen mid-frame. "There is something there," he said quietly. "I can feel it." "Feelings don't win trials, detective," the voice said flatly. "I'll give you 48 hours. If nothing new surfaces, it's over." The line clicked dead. Rate, slow, pitch, tontust. Ethan lowered the phone slowly, his knuckles white. The clock on the wall ticked louder than before. Each second felt heavier, pressing against his chest. He stood and crossed the room, pacing. The rain outside had turned violent, hammering the glass. Lightning flashed, illuminating Rex's face for a heartbeat. The dog was watching him silently, eyes full of understanding. Ethan raked a hand through his hair. "They don't get it," he muttered. "They see a scared kid and think it's unreliable. But I've seen liars before, grown men, hardened criminals. She's not lying, she's trapped." He turned to the monitor again, his reflection overlapping the paused image of the little girl. Two people, both tired, both carrying something too heavy to name. He sat back down, elbows on his knees, staring at nothing. Maybe I'm chasing ghosts, huh? Rex moved closer and sat beside him, resting his head against Ethan's leg. The warmth was grounding. Ethan placed a hand on the dog's head and stayed there, the silence between them saying more than words ever could. He thought back to when he first joined the force, when he believed every case could be solved with logic and evidence. But years had taught him the truth. Sometimes justice needed faith. Sometimes the only thing separating a breakthrough from a dead end was the stubborn belief that someone deserved to be heard. Ethan looked down at Rex. You know, buddy, maybe we're the only ones who believe her. Rex gave a small huff, tail thumping once against the floor. Ethan smiled faintly. Yeah, maybe that's enough. The clock struck midnight. The room was dim except for the soft flicker of the screen and the occasional lightning flash outside. Ethan turned off the video, the sudden darkness almost comforting. He leaned back in his chair, letting out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. Time satoms. His mind wouldn't stop turning, replaying the girl's every hesitation, every trembling pause. There was something he was missing, something right in front of him. He could feel it, like an itch he couldn't scratch. The station's old pipes creaked as the rain poured harder. Somewhere down the hall, a vending machine buzzed faintly. It was the sound of emptiness, a building alive only because men like him refused to go home when the truth hadn't been found. Ethan finally rose, stretching, his back popping. Come on, Rex. Let's call it a night. But as he reached for his coat, Rex didn't move. The dog remained seated, staring toward the door, ears pricked, body tense. Ethan frowned. What is it? Rex didn't bark, just stared. Then, after a few seconds, he relaxed again, lying back down. False alarm. But that tension, that brief alertness, sent a chill down Ethan's spine. He walked over, kneeling beside his partner. You feel it too, huh? Like something's still in the air. Rex's tail gave a soft thump. Ethan chuckled softly, shaking his head. You always were the better detective. He reached out, scratching behind Rex's ear. We'll find it, boy. Whatever it is, whatever's hiding in that little girl's story, we'll find it. Outside, the thunder rolled again, deeper this time, like the world itself was warning them of what lay ahead. Ethan stood by the window, watching raindrops race down the glass. The city lights shimmered below, distorted by the storm. Somewhere out there, a truth was waiting. Buried, fragile, dangerous. He pressed a hand to the glass, feeling the cold seep into his skin. For a moment, he closed his eyes. In the silence that followed, Rex's quiet breathing filled the room, a steady rhythm, a reminder that he wasn't alone. Ethan turned off the lights and whispered into the dark. We're not done. Raichi slow pitch twitched. The storm outside answered with another growl of thunder, low, distant, and inevitable. Morning arrived in pale streaks of light through the precinct blinds. The storm from the night before had passed, but the air still felt heavy, as if the building had absorbed all the unease that had lingered through the dark hours. Detective Ethan Cole stood by the one-way mirror again, arms crossed, watching as the small interview room was reset. The harsh ceiling lamp was replaced by a soft, warm light. The table that once felt sterile now held a mug of steaming cocoa, a small teddy bear, and a coloring book with worn crayons scattered beside it. It wasn't much, but he needed the space to feel safe, not interrogative. He had barely slept. The footage from the night before still haunted him. He told me not to tell. The sentence replayed in his mind over and over, quiet, but sharp as glass. When Lila was brought in again, she looked even smaller than yesterday. Her hair was tangled, her sleeves pulled over her hands. She hesitated in the doorway, until she saw Ethan waiting at the table. He gave her the gentlest smile he could manage. Morning, Lila, he said softly. I saved you some cocoa. Still warm. She nodded without a word, clutching the same old plush rabbit, its fabric dull, one ear nearly torn off. The toy looked like it had been through as much as she had. Ethan waited a while before saying anything more. He knew children didn't open up because of questions. They opened up because someone gave them space to breathe. You like the teddy? He asked. She shrugged, eyes fixed on the cocoa. It's not mine. I know. Just thought he could keep us company today. She didn't answer, only took a small sip, then stared down at her lap, her fingers fidgeting with the rabbit's button eye. Ethan leaned forward a bit, keeping his voice gentle. Lila, remember how we talked yesterday? You did really good. You were brave. Her lips pressed together. He continued softly. I just want to ask a few more questions today. Nothing scary, okay? Her shoulders tensed. If I tell you, he'll be mad. Ethan's heart sank at the tremor in her voice. He didn't ask who. He didn't need to, not yet. Instead, he reached into his pocket and took out his badge, polished but simple. See this? He said, holding it out gently so it caught the soft light. This means I protect people. It means I'll keep you safe no matter what. Her eyes flickered toward it, uncertain. Then she glanced at the rabbit again and hugged it closer. He said no one would believe me, she murmured. Ethan felt his breath catch. He lowered the badge slowly. Sometimes people say things like that to make us scared. But I believe you, Lila. I do. She didn't look at him. You're lying. The words were quiet, but they pierced deeper than a shout. Ethan took a deep breath, steadying his tone. I'm not lying. You're safe here. Behind the mirror, the observation team was silent, scribbling notes. A young officer leaned toward the prosecutor. She's deflecting again, he whispered. Same as yesterday. She's too inconsistent. We'll never get a solid statement. Ethan ignored their shadows, focusing only on the trembling girl in front of him. Lila, he said softly, can you tell me what happened after you went outside that night? She shook her head quickly. No. Why not? I don't remember. Her voice broke halfway through, and she pulled the rabbit to her face as if to hide behind it. Ethan sat back, running a hand over his mouth. This wasn't working. Every time they got close, her fear pulled her backward. He tried changing the angle. It's okay if you don't remember everything. Maybe you can tell me what you do remember? Anything small, a sound, a smell, what the sky looked like? Her brow furrowed. There was rain and a car, then she trailed off. Then nothing. Nothing, he asked softly. She shook her head. I was in the dark. Ethan's pen paused over his notebook. In the dark? For a long time? Lila didn't answer. Her gaze unfocused, like she was somewhere else entirely. Her fingers tightened around the rabbit until the fabric stretched. Lila? Ethan whispered. Her eyes snapped back to his, wide, frightened. Can we stop now? He hesitated, then nodded slowly. Yeah, we can stop. She stood abruptly, chair legs scraping against the tile. She looked toward the door, not at the officer outside, but beyond it, as though afraid something waited there. As she was led out by the social worker, Ethan stayed seated. His hands trembled slightly as he closed his notebook. He couldn't shake the feeling that her silence wasn't confusion. It was warning. When the door shut, the team entered the room. The younger officer was the first to speak. She's stonewalling you, Cole. We've been at this for 2 days, and the story keeps changing. We need to push harder. Ethan looked up sharply. Push harder? She's a 6-year-old girl, not a suspect. The officer scoffed. Then what? You gonna wait until she decides to tell a bedtime story? The DA's already losing patience. The prosecutor nodded reluctantly. Ethan, they're right about one thing. Without a coherent timeline, the defense will rip this apart. Ethan stood, frustration rising. She's traumatized. You can't just demand clarity like she's reciting a report. She's trying to protect herself. The words landed like a slap. Ethan's eyes darkened. Say that again. The room fell silent. The hum of the air vent filled the space. The prosecutor sighed. Look, no one's saying she's lying, but trauma can distort memory. We just need something verifiable. You understand how this works. Ethan exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. Yeah, I understand. When they left, he remained in the empty room, staring at the small teddy bear left on the table. The cocoa had gone cold again. He sat down heavily, elbows on his knees. Rex padded into the room, nails clicking softly on the floor. He had been waiting outside the entire time, patient and quiet. The dog's eyes scanned Ethan, then the empty chair where Lila had been. She's slipping away from me, Ethan murmured. I can feel it. Rex approached, resting his chin on Ethan's thigh. You think I'm too soft, huh? Ethan asked with a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. Maybe they're right. He glanced at the mirror, where his own reflection stared back, tired, uncertain. She's traumatized, not lying, he whispered again, as if repeating it would make it true. Rex's ears perked slightly, sensing the doubt buried beneath the words. Ethan leaned back, staring at the ceiling. What if I'm wrong, boy? What if all this pain, all this work, what if it's built on something that isn't real? The dog didn't move, just stayed there, breathing slow, steady, grounding. Ethan lowered his gaze to the small bear, to the untouched crayons, to the empty space across from him. No, he said finally, almost to himself. She's telling the truth. I just haven't learned how to hear it yet. Outside, the clouds gathered again, heavy, gray, waiting, and somewhere deep inside the walls of the precinct, the quiet truth trembled, still hidden behind a child's silence. The hallway outside the interview room smelled faintly of coffee and rain-soaked concrete. The air was still heavy, with the residue of what had just unfolded inside. The child's trembling words, the silence that followed, the uncertainty that had wrapped around every sentence, like invisible thread. Detective Ethan Cole stood by the door, his expression unreadable. He'd escorted Lila out moments ago, watching as the social worker gently guided her down the corridor, the small girl's arms wrapped protectively around her tattered plush rabbit. Ethan wanted to believe they were getting somewhere, that maybe, just maybe, she'd open up next time. But as the door clicked shut behind her, the old doubt crept back in, heavier than before. Rex, his loyal K9 partner, had been waiting in the hall, tail lowered, body alert. The German shepherd's amber eyes followed Lila as she walked past, his nose twitching slightly. Then, all at once, something changed in his posture. The moment the child disappeared around the corner, Rex's ears pricked forward. He turned his head toward the small chair near the door, the one where Lila had dropped her bag earlier. A faint sound, a soft sniff, 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 filled the air as the dog began to move. Ethan frowned. What is it, boy? Rex didn't answer, of course, but his focus was sharp, unwavering. He padded closer to the door, sniffing the crack beneath it, then turned toward the corner where the child's small tote bag rested against the wall. Inside it were crayons, a coloring book, and that same plush rabbit she never let go of. Rex, Ethan said quietly. Leave it. The command was firm, practiced, but Rex didn't move. Instead, he crouched slightly, nose pressed to the floor, tracing invisible trails that only he could sense. Then a low growl rumbled from his chest, soft, restrained, but unmistakable. Ethan's brows knit together. Hey, he murmured, stepping closer. Easy, boy. But Rex wasn't agitated. His growl wasn't one of warning. It was one of focus. His tail stiffened, his body locked in that stillness unique to trained dogs when they'd found something worth noticing. Ethan crouched beside him, following his gaze to the child's bag. You smell something, don't you? Rex's ears flicked. He sniffed again, deeper this time, then nudged the bag gently with his nose. His body language was clear. Something's here. Ethan hesitated. It's just a toy bag, he muttered under his breath. Still, his gut tightened. He slowly unzipped the top. Inside were the expected things: the rabbit, the coloring book, some crayons worn down to stubs. But Rex's nose went straight to the rabbit, the old patchy toy with the missing ear. The dog's nostrils flared. Then he let out another low growl. Ethan frowned. He lifted the toy, careful not to damage it. The fabric was stiff in places, discolored, not just from dirt. He turned it over in his hands. There, along one seam, the stitches looked newer, uneven, mismatched to the rest. Did someone fix you up, huh? Ethan whispered to the toy, half to himself. Rex's tail flicked once. His eyes didn't leave the rabbit. Ethan set it back down carefully. All right, he said softly, almost to reassure himself. Maybe it's just the smell of the kid, or the house she came from. You're overthinking. But even as he said it, Rex refused to relax. The dog stood by the bag, muscles tense, nose lowering again, inhaling, slow, deliberate. Ethan finally sighed, straightening. Okay, come on. We're done here. He tugged gently on Rex's collar. Let's go. Rex hesitated, then obeyed, though reluctantly. His eyes flicked back toward the door as Ethan led him down the hall. They walked past the observation window. Through the one-way glass, the empty interview room sat in stillness. The untouched cocoa, the crayons, the small teddy bear lying on its side. It looked innocent, safe. But something in the air felt off. Halfway down the corridor, Ethan stopped. He could hear the faint hum of the overhead lights, the distant ring of a phone somewhere. But behind it all, the silence pressed in, too thick, too deliberate. He turned. Rex had stopped following. The German shepherd had returned to the interview room door, sitting squarely in front of it, head high, tail stiff, staring at the seam beneath the door as if something on the other side called to him. Rex, Ethan called softly. No response. Rex, he tried again, sharper this time. Still nothing. The dog stayed where he was, unwavering. Only the slow rise and fall of his chest moved. His ears twitched at every sound inside. The faint hum of the air vent. The quiet drip of condensation. He wasn't anxious. He was certain. Ethan's brow furrowed. He knew this behavior. Rex didn't fixate unless his instincts told him something undeniable. A scent. A trace, a clue. He walked back to him, crouching beside the dog. You're not letting this go, are you? Rex's head turned toward him for a heartbeat, then back to the door. Ethan exhaled slowly. All right. What am I missing? He looked through the window again. The rabbit toy still sat there in the bag, just as he'd left it. But now, in the quiet glow of the morning light, it seemed different. The way its fabric slumped, the way one of its button eyes caught the reflection of the window. Dull, lifeless. The stitching along the side almost looked like it had been redone, not to repair, but to hide. The thought hit him, unexpectedly hard. He pressed a hand to his chin, gaze fixed. No, he murmured. Couldn't be. But Rex's stillness said otherwise. Ethan stood, his reflection overlapping the dog's silhouette in the glass. To anyone else, it would have just been a worn-out toy. But to Rex, it was something more. A whisper of scent, a fragment of truth buried under cotton and thread. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. If you're right, buddy. He trailed off, shaking his head. Then she's been holding on to more than fear. Rex's ears twitched. For a long moment the two stood in silence, man and dog, both sensing something, just out of reach. Then the hallway lights flickered, breaking the trance. A janitor's cart squeaked in the distance. The spell of the moment seemed to dissolve, but the unease didn't. Ethan gave Rex a final pat. Come on, he said, forcing a small exhale. We'll look into it later. But even as they walked away, Rex paused again at the end of the hall and turned his head back. One last look at that door, that bag, that toy. His gaze lingered, sharp, unwavering. The camera, if there had been one, would have followed his line of sight, closing in slowly on the plush rabbit half buried in the bag. The frayed seams, the mismatched stitching, the faint brownish discoloration. That wasn't just dirt. A silent warning, wrapped in innocence. A secret no one had yet dared to unearth. And as the scene faded, the sound of Rex's claws clicking down the hallway echoed softly, a rhythm of instinct, of truth, inching closer, waiting to be found. The precinct was quieter than usual that afternoon. The storm had passed, leaving behind a heavy stillness that clung to the air like fog. The corridors smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee, the scent of long days and restless nights. Most of the team had gone for lunch, leaving Detective Ethan Cole alone, with paperwork that refused to make sense. He rubbed his temples, exhaustion clouding his focus. For days, he'd been circling the same puzzle, a frightened child, a half-told story, a room full of doubters. He needed something, anything, to break through the silence that bound the truth. From the corner, Rex stirred. The German shepherd lifted his head, ears twitching, as if catching a sound beyond human reach. Ethan looked over at him and smiled faintly. What is it, boy? You missed the kid too? Rex gave a soft whine, low, almost mournful. Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring through the glass wall toward the empty interview room. The teddy bear still sat on the table, untouched. The cocoa mug had been washed, but the faint ring on the table remained, a ghost of their last session. He stood. Come on, partner. Let's take a walk. Rex was on his feet instantly, tail low but eager. They moved through the hallway, their footsteps echoing softly against the linoleum floor. When they reached the witness room, Ethan paused, hand on the doorknob. He hadn't planned to bring Lila in again today. The psychologist had advised giving her time to rest. But something inside him stirred, a quiet instinct that matched the one he'd seen in Rex the day before. He opened the door. Lila sat on the small chair by the table, coloring absent-mindedly with a dull red crayon. The plush rabbit lay beside her, patched, faded, still clutched close when she wasn't drawing. The social worker sat in the corner, keeping a watchful but distant eye. "Hey there," Ethan said softly, stepping in. "Mind if Rex says hi?" "Time 5,000. Lila looked up, startled, then nodded hesitantly. Her small voice trembled. "He's nice." "The nicest," Ethan replied, crouching beside her. Rex moved forward slowly, tail wagging once, before he sat just a few feet away, watching her closely. Lila reached out a cautious hand, and Rex sniffed it gently, before resting his chin on her knee. A flicker of a smile appeared on her face, the first real one Ethan had seen since the day they met. For a brief moment, the room felt almost peaceful. The air softened, the tension faded. But then, something shifted. Rex's nose twitched. His eyes darted from the girl's face to the rabbit toy lying on the table. His ears pricked forward, muscles tightening slightly beneath his coat. Ethan noticed the change immediately. "Rex?" Before he could react, Rex moved, quick but careful, his snout nudging the toy closer, then tugging at its frayed ear. Lila froze. "No!" she cried out, her voice breaking. She grabbed for it, but Rex pulled back just enough that the fabric gave way. "Rex, stop!" Ethan reached out, but too late. The old seams split, with a sharp rip. A small piece of fabric, torn and stained, fell to the floor. A second later, a tiny folded note fluttered out after it, landing near Ethan's boot. The room went still. Lila stared, wide-eyed, her breath shallow. Then she screamed, a sound of panic more than anger, and buried her face in her hands. "Give it back! Don't take him away!" Rex stepped back instantly, tail lowering, ears flat. He whimpered softly, sensing her distress. Ethan knelt, one hand reaching for the girl, the other picking up the note. Hey, he murmured, voice gentle but shaking. "It's okay, sweetheart. Nobody's taking anything from you." But Lila couldn't stop crying. Her shoulders shook as she clutched what was left of the rabbit's torn body. Ethan glanced at the floor again. The cloth scrap was small, about the size of a handkerchief, darkened in patches, some of them dry, others faintly discolored. His training recognized it instantly. Blood. Old, but still visible. He looked at the note. The paper was folded several times, the edges wrinkled and soft from being handled. With a deep breath, he opened it carefully. Inside, written in faint pencil, were 6 chilling words. "You promised you wouldn't tell." The world seemed to narrow. The humming of the lights above faded, replaced by the pounding of his heartbeat in his ears. He turned to the social worker, who had risen to her feet, face pale. "Get the lab on standby," Ethan said, voice low but firm. "Now." The woman nodded quickly and hurried out, leaving Ethan alone with Lila and Rex. He knelt again, lowering himself to Lila's level. The girl's sobs had quieted, though tears still clung to her lashes. "Lila," he whispered, holding out the note carefully. "Where did this come from?" She shook her head violently. "I don't know." "It was inside your toy, sweetheart. Did someone put it there?" Her lips trembled. "He said, if I didn't keep it safe, he'd find me." Ethan's chest tightened. He forced himself to stay calm. "Who said that, Lila?" But she didn't answer. Her small hands were trembling as she tried to reattach the torn ear of her rabbit, whispering under her breath, words too soft to hear. Ethan glanced at Rex, who had sat back down, watching silently. The dog's gaze was steady, as though saying, "I told you so." He picked up the cloth scrap and sealed it carefully inside an evidence pouch. The metallic tang of old blood clung faintly to his fingers, even through the gloves. The note he held for one more second, long enough to feel the weight of those words again. "You promised you wouldn't tell." Time tone. It wasn't just a threat. It was a command, a leash around a child's silence. Ethan stood slowly, his jaw tightening, as the truth began to click into place. The toy wasn't just comfort. It was a prison of memory, the last place anyone would think to look. He looked down at Lila, still holding what was left of her rabbit, her small frame shaking. Then he turned to Rex. "You found it, buddy," he said quietly. "You found what none of us could see." Rex wagged his tail once, then lowered his head, as if in respect. Ethan exhaled deeply, eyes burning. The room still smelled faintly of cocoa and crayon wax, but beneath it now lingered something darker, something metallic and real. He whispered, half to himself, half to Rex. This wasn't just a toy. It was her secret. And as he looked again, at the torn seams, the faint brown stain, and the trembling child who had guarded it so fiercely, he realized that the line between innocence and evidence had just been erased. The truth had been hiding all along, small enough to fit inside the arms of a frightened child. The sterile hum of the forensic lab filled the air, a rhythm of whirring machines, the faint hiss of ventilators, and the occasional metallic clink of instruments. The room smelled of ethanol and cold steel, a scent that always carried the weight of truth, unfeeling, precise, undeniable. Detective Ethan Cole stood by the observation glass, arms crossed, jaw tight. On the metal tray before the technicians lay the small scrap of cloth and the folded note pulled from Lila's toy. Under bright white light, the fabric looked even darker, the faint reddish-brown stains more sinister now that they were real, not imagined. Across the room, a forensic analyst named Dr. Moran adjusted her gloves and carefully placed the sample beneath a microscope. "We'll run both fiber and biological testing," she said, not looking up. "Might take a few hours, but I'll fast-track it." Ethan nodded silently, his gaze fixed on the evidence. Every instinct told him this was the break they'd been waiting for. Yet beneath that hope was a gnawing unease, the realization that this confirmation would not only prove what happened, but force him to confront how deeply that child's pain had been ignored. Rex lay beside him, stretched across the tiled floor, chin resting on his paws. His amber eyes followed Ethan's every move, calm, yet vigilant, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. "Wouldn't believe me if I told you, huh, boy?" Ethan muttered softly, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. A toy. Of all things. Rex thumped his tail once, a slow, knowing gesture. Hours passed. The hum of the machines became background noise, the kind that settled into the bones. Ethan sipped bad coffee, paced, stared through the glass, and repeated the same silent mantra. Please let it match. Please don't let it end here. Finally, Dr. Moran removed her gloves, her face pale under the harsh light. She turned to him through the glass and motioned for him to come in. Ethan pushed open the door, Rex following closely behind. Moran gestured toward the monitor, where magnified images of the fabric filled the screen. "We confirmed 2 primary findings," she said. "First, the fibers. She pointed to a series of side-by-side images, one of the cloth scrap, one of a fabric sample labeled Lila dress. Evidence box 2. The weave pattern and thread color match perfectly, Moran continued. Even under UV light, the fiber consistency is identical. This piece was torn directly from her dress, the night of the incident. Ethan leaned in, staring at the screen. He recognized the dress from the photos, pale blue, with a white collar, the one she'd worn the night she was found crying on the front porch, too frightened to speak. "The stains?" he asked quietly. Moran hesitated, then brought up another chart. "We isolated trace hemoglobin. The age of the sample suggests it's consistent with the timeline of the incident, about 2 weeks old. But here's where it gets interesting." She switched to a new slide. DNA readouts, lines of peaks and valleys forming an unmistakable pattern. "We found 2 distinct profiles," she said. "One belongs to Lila, the other," she clicked, enlarging the chart, "matches your primary suspect, Andrew Keller." Ethan's breath caught. For a moment, he didn't move. The name hit him like a physical blow. Keller, the man who had smiled through every interrogation, calm, confident, practically mocking them. The one who'd said, "There's no proof, just a scared kid," and her nightmares. Now, there was proof. Cold, solid, irrefutable proof. Moran continued speaking, but her words blurred into background noise. Ethan's world tunneled. Just the sound of his heartbeat, the soft click of the printer, and the faint shuffle of Rex's paws behind him. He turned away from the monitor, walking to the corner of the room where the printer began spitting out the results. Each page emerged slowly, the black ink forming the story that would finally be believed. His hand trembled slightly as he grabbed the first sheet. There it was, the confirmation in bold letters. DNA match confirmed. Subject, Andrew Keller. Ethan exhaled sharply, pressing his thumb against the edge of the paper until it crumpled. A flood of emotion hit him all at once. Relief, rage, vindication, grief. He'd been right. She hadn't lied. Every stuttered word, every fearful glance, every contradiction. It had all been the fractured truth of a child trying to speak through her terror. He clenched the paper tighter. "That son of a detective," Moran's voice pulled him back. "We'll prepare the full report for the DA. You might want to inform them." Ethan nodded, swallowing hard. Yeah, I will." He stepped outside, the corridor cool and silent. The hum of the lab faded behind him, replaced by the distant echo of a ringing phone down the hall. Rex followed, his tail brushing lightly against Ethan's leg as they walked. At his desk, Ethan picked up the phone and dialed. The line clicked. "Cole," the prosecutor's voice answered, tired but sharp. "It's done," Ethan said quietly. "We found something. A piece of fabric from the girl's toy. The lab matched the stains. Keller's DNA is all over it." There was a pause. Then, for the first time in weeks, the prosecutor's tone shifted, from skepticism to awe. "You've just changed everything." Ethan leaned back in his chair, letting the words sink in. He looked down at Rex, who had settled at his feet again, eyes half closed, tail flicking lazily. "You hear that, partner?" Ethan murmured. "You did it." Rex opened his eyes, looking up at him, tail wagging gently, as if to say, "I told you so." Ethan smiled faintly, the first genuine smile he'd had in days, then slid off his chair and knelt beside his partner. The dog's warm breath brushed against his arm as he wrapped one arm around his sturdy neck. "You found her voice, buddy," he whispered. His own voice broke a little. "You gave it back to her." Rex leaned into him, pressing his head against Ethan's shoulder. For a long moment, they stayed like that, man and dog, bound by the unspoken understanding of what justice meant. The pages of the report lay scattered across the desk, the bold letters gleaming under the flickering light. DNA match confirmed. Outside, the sun began to dip behind the city skyline, painting the sky in muted orange and gray. It was a quiet evening, deceptively calm, but beneath that calm, the gears of truth had finally begun to turn. Ethan rose slowly, gathering the papers, his resolve hardening. He looked down once more at Rex. "We're taking him down, boy. No more hiding, no more silence." Rex barked once, short and certain, a sound that echoed down the empty corridor, like a promise. And in that sound, Ethan heard the one thing that had been missing since this case began: hope. The courthouse was overflowing. Cameras lined the marble steps outside, their flashes slicing through the morning haze. Inside, the air was thick, not just with humidity, but with the kind of tension that precedes a reckoning. Every cough, every shuffle of paper, every whispered word seemed amplified beneath the high ceiling of the courtroom. At the center of it all sat Detective Ethan Cole, his badge polished, his expression unreadable. Beside him, Rex lay quietly, head resting between his paws, a silent presence, steady as stone. Across the aisle, Andrew Keller, the accused, sat flanked by his defense attorney, a man with sharp features and a sharper tongue. Keller's composure was unnerving, too calm, for someone whose world was about to collapse. The judge, an older man with solemn eyes, adjusted his glasses and signaled the start. "Court is now in session. Proceed." The prosecutor rose first, her voice clear and deliberate. "Your Honor, the evidence submitted by Detective Cole and his K-9 partner is conclusive. The fabric found within the child's toy contains the victim's fibers and the defendant's DNA. It confirms the child's testimony and places Mr. Keller at the scene." A low murmur rippled through the audience. Reporters, spectators, off-duty officers. The defense attorney stood slowly, buttoning his jacket with practiced ease. "Your Honor," he began, tone almost mocking, "we are talking about a piece of fabric found by a dog. Surely, the court doesn't intend to base a conviction on canine intuition." He turned toward the jury, pacing deliberately. "A dog cannot testify. It cannot confirm intent. It cannot distinguish truth from coincidence. The so-called discovery could have been planted, contaminated, or misconstrued." He let the words linger, watching the jurors' faces tighten with uncertainty. Ethan's jaw flexed, but he stayed composed. He'd expected this. The lawyer would try to dismantle the evidence piece by piece, not because it was false, but because it was inconveniently true. The prosecutor responded sharply. "The discovery was verified through forensic analysis. DNA doesn't lie." "Perhaps not," the defense countered, "but men do, and dogs, well, dogs act on instinct, not evidence. Are we now allowing animals to dictate human guilt?" A few people in the gallery chuckled uneasily. The defense attorney smirked, sensing momentum. "Let me be clear," he continued, raising a finger for emphasis. "This entire case hinges on a coincidence, that a frightened child's toy just happened to contain fabric matching the night in question. A toy, ladies and gentlemen." He turned toward Ethan now, voice dripping with skepticism. Detective Cole, do you truly expect this jury to believe your dog solved the case? The question hung in the air, like a dare. Cameras clicked. A juror coughed nervously. Ethan leaned forward, his voice low but steady. I expect them to believe the truth. The defense scoffed. Which truth? The one you found, or the one your dog sniffed out? Ethan's gaze didn't waver. Sometimes, he said quietly, truth doesn't speak. It's found. For a moment, the courtroom was silent. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. The defense attorney blinked, thrown off by the calm certainty in Ethan's tone. Rex lifted his head, eyes glinting amber under the overhead lights. His ears perked slightly, as though understanding that his name, his instinct, was being weighed before the world. Ethan continued, his voice gathering quiet strength. That dog didn't act on coincidence. He reacted to scent. A scent we missed, because we were too busy doubting a child who'd already been silenced enough. If it weren't for Rex, that evidence would still be hidden, and so would the truth. The jury murmured softly among themselves. The judge's gavel tapped once for order, but even he didn't interrupt. From the back of the courtroom, a soft noise broke the silence, the faint creak of a small chair. Everyone turned. Lila was there, sitting beside her guardian in the front row. The same child, whose voice had trembled through every testimony, now sat small and still, clutching her plush rabbit, newly stitched, clean, whole again. Her wide eyes met Ethan's. There was no fear this time, only quiet trust, as if she finally knew that someone had heard her, even when she couldn't speak. Ethan gave her a small nod, one that said, "You did it, kiddo." The defense attorney, realizing the shift in the room's energy, tried to recover. Emotional appeals won't prove guilt, detective. The law requires evidence beyond reasonable doubt. And we have that, the prosecutor interjected firmly, holding up the printed lab report. This isn't emotion, it's science. Keller's DNA is there. His alibi is false. The child's statement, once fragmented, now aligns perfectly with the physical proof. The defense attorney frowned, flipping through his notes with irritation. Or perhaps the police contaminated the sample. Perhaps. Enough, the judge said, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. Counsel will refrain from baseless speculation. The courtroom fell silent again. Ethan's pulse slowed, steady. He could feel Rex shift at his feet, the dog's quiet breathing, a grounding presence. The prosecutor turned toward the jury. This isn't just about evidence, she said softly. It's about courage. The courage of a child who faced her fear, and the courage of those who listened when she finally found her voice. That voice came from instinct, from trust, and yes, from a dog whose only loyalty is to truth. The defense started to object, but the judge lifted a hand. The court will hear no further interruptions. A hush fell again. Every eye turned toward the defendant's table. Keller shifted uneasily, his composure cracking for the first time. His lawyer whispered something to him, but Keller didn't respond. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the table. Ethan saw it. The flicker of guilt, small but unmistakable. He'd seen that look before in interrogation rooms, the moment when a man realizes the walls are closing in. The judge leaned forward. Detective Cole, you may step down. Ethan nodded and rose. As he walked back to his seat, his gaze brushed once more toward Lila. She still clutched the rabbit tightly, But now, her small hand loosened, just enough to stroke its patched ear. When he sat down beside Rex, the dog rested his head on Ethan's boot. Ethan whispered under his breath, "Almost there, partner." Rex's tail moved once, a quiet, single wag. Outside, thunder rolled faintly again, distant, echoing against the courthouse walls, as if the storm that began this case hadn't truly passed, only waited for its final roar. And inside that courtroom, with truth and deception colliding under oath, the silence that followed was louder than any verdict yet to come. The courtroom air had changed. The tension that once felt abstract now hung heavy, tangible, like a storm, moments before breaking. The defendant, Andrew Keller, sat rigid in his chair, hands clasped so tightly the veins stood out like cords beneath his skin. The lab reports lay on the prosecution's desk, stark and final. Every word spoken now felt like the prelude to an ending. No one could escape. The judge's gavel tapped once. "Proceed." The prosecutor rose, her expression measured but fierce. "Mr. Keller," she began, "you've heard the evidence presented today. You've heard the results from the forensic lab, the DNA match, the recovered note, the corroboration of the witness's statement. You still claim no involvement." Keller's jaw flexed. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot, but defiant. "I told you already. I wasn't there that night." Ethan, seated beside Rex near the front, didn't move. He simply watched, not with anger, but with that quiet steadiness born of men who had seen the truth unravel, one thread at a time. Rex lay at his feet, calm, eyes fixed on Keller, with an almost human intensity. The prosecutor continued, "Then perhaps you can explain how your DNA was found on an object belonging to the child, a piece of fabric, hidden inside her toy." Keller's mouth opened, but no sound came. His throat worked, as if swallowing something too sharp. "Do you deny knowing her?" He hesitated, then said, She used to live nearby." The gallery murmured. The prosecutor pressed forward. "Nearby isn't the same as involved. So let's be clear, Mr. Keller. Why was your DNA on the evidence recovered from her possession?" The silence stretched too long. Keller's lawyer shifted uneasily, whispering something into his ear, but Keller didn't seem to hear. His breathing had quickened. A drop of sweat traced down his temple. From the corner of his vision, Ethan noticed Rex's posture change. The dog's head lifted, ears pricked, body subtly tense. He sensed the shift before anyone else did. The air was turning electric. The prosecutor spoke again, this time quieter, sharper. "The note we found. It said, you promised you wouldn't tell. Who were you talking to, Mr. Keller?" Keller's eyes flicked toward Lila, sitting near the front beside her guardian. The little girl froze under his gaze, clutching her rabbit so tightly. Her knuckles went white. Something inside Keller cracked. His lips trembled. "It wasn't supposed to happen," he whispered. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. The defense attorney stiffened, eyes wide. "Andrew, stop talking." But the dam had broken. Keller's voice, trembling and uneven, grew louder. "I just wanted to scare her. That's all. She saw me that night, and I panicked. She wasn't supposed to be there." "Mr. Keller," his lawyer snapped, rising, "don't say another word." But Keller's words poured out, unstoppable now, raw, jagged confessions tumbling from a mouth that had spent weeks denying everything. "I told her not to tell anyone," he cried. "She wouldn't stop crying. Oh, I didn't mean—" His breath hitched. "I didn't mean for it to go that far." Gasps filled the room again. Reporters fumbling for their pens, the gallery whispering in shock. The prosecutor froze mid-step, momentarily stunned by the unprompted confession. The judge struck his gavel hard. "Order! Order!" But his voice was drowned by the chaos. Lila began to sob quietly, shoulders shaking. The sound pierced through Ethan like a blade. He rose instantly, signaling to the bailiff. "Get her out," he said softly. "Now!" The guardian stood, wrapping an arm around the trembling child, guiding her toward the side door. "Time bore 7 charms." As they passed, Ethan crouched slightly, catching her eye. "It's okay," he murmured. "You did enough. You're safe now." Her eyes, wet and red, searched his for reassurance. He nodded once, firm, steady, the kind of promise a man keeps, even after the world moves on. When she disappeared from sight, Ethan turned back to the defendant. Keller was now shaking violently, his face pale. His lawyer tried to cover the damage. "My client is under immense psychological pressure," but it was too late. Keller's voice cracked again, hoarse, desperate. "She screamed my name. I didn't mean to. I thought—" He stopped, gasping. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, barely audible, he said, "I'm sorry." The entire room fell still. The prosecutor's voice was steady when she finally spoke. "Your Honor, the defendant has just confessed before this court." The judge leaned forward, face stern, but voice carrying the weight of finality. "The record will reflect the defendant's admission. The court will recess until sentencing." The gavel struck once, echoing like thunder. Ethan exhaled slowly, the sound more like release than relief. His hands trembled slightly as he rested them on the back of the chair before him. For weeks, this case had consumed him. The sleepless nights, the doubt, the child's fear, the disbelief of his peers. And now, with one broken sentence, it was over. Justice had spoken, not in evidence, not in data, but in the shattering of a man's denial. He looked down. Rex had risen to his feet, standing tall, muscles taut, eyes fixed on Keller. The dog's tail lifted slightly, and then, I saw, as if to mark the moment, he barked once. The sound cut through the courtroom like a gunshot, sharp, echoing, final. Every head turned. Keller flinched. The silence that followed carried an eerie weight, as though that single bark had closed the last page of the story. Ethan knelt, resting a hand on Rex's neck. "Easy, boy," he murmured, though a faint smile touched his lips. "You're right. It's done." Rex's tail wagged once, slowly, as if in agreement. The bailiffs moved to escort Keller away, his hands now shaking uncontrollably. As he was led past Ethan, their eyes met. For a brief, frozen moment, Keller looked like a man already haunted, not by guilt alone, but by the echo of his own words. "It wasn't supposed to happen," he muttered again, voice hollow. Ethan didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. When the doors finally closed behind the defendant, the courtroom began to empty. The journalists whispered into recorders. The prosecutor stacked her papers in silence. The judge retreated to chambers. Yet for Ethan, the world remained perfectly still. He looked toward the now empty seat where Lila had been. The small rabbit toy sat on the cushion, forgotten for the moment, its patched seams and clean fabric bathed in the soft afternoon light, pouring through the windows. A symbol of everything they had fought for. Innocence restored. Truth revealed. Ethan rose, straightening his jacket. "Come on, partner," he said quietly. "Let's go check on her." Rex followed, footsteps echoing down the marble corridor. As they passed through the heavy wooden doors, the light caught his fur, gold and gray, and for a brief, fleeting second, it seemed like the shadow of every burden that had weighed them down was finally lifting. Justice at last had barked back. The courthouse was nearly empty now. The once crowded corridors, filled hours ago with reporters, attorneys, and restless murmurs, stood silent, except for the faint echo of distant footsteps. The case that had consumed everyone for weeks was finally over. Verdict delivered. Justice served. Detective Ethan Cole stood by the heavy wooden doors for a long moment, his coat draped loosely over his shoulders. The fluorescent lights flickered above him, washing the hallway in a pale, ghostly glow. For the first time in days, he felt no urgency to move. The noise had faded, but the weight of everything still pressed against his chest, not heavy with doubt anymore, but with quiet exhaustion. The child's guardian, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, approached him softly. She held Lila's small hand, the same hand that had once trembled every time she entered a room. Now, though, it was steady. The girl walked with slow, deliberate steps, her shoulders no longer hunched in fear. "Detective Cole," the guardian said, her voice low, almost reverent. "I don't know how to thank you." Ethan shook his head lightly. "You don't have to." She smiled faintly. "You gave her a voice again." He looked down at Lila, who was staring at the marble floor. Her patched-up plush rabbit hung from her arm, its seams newly sewn, its face cleaner than it had ever been. The faint trace of pink thread stood out, where the old tears had once been. "Hey, kiddo," Ethan said softly, crouching to her level. "You holding up?" She nodded. "He won't come back, right?" Ethan's throat tightened. "No, not ever again." She seemed to think about that for a second, then whispered, "Rex was brave." Ethan smiled. "Yeah, he was." The guardian squeezed her hand gently, signaling it was time to go. As they turned toward the exit, the little girl hesitated. "Time, 100%. She looked at her toy, then back at Ethan. "Can I leave this here?" Ethan blinked. "You mean your rabbit?" She nodded, her small voice soft but sure. "He can keep it. Rex, he's brave. He'll keep it safe." The moment hung suspended. Simple words, yet weighted with so much meaning. Ethan swallowed hard, managing a nod. "Yeah," he said quietly. "He'll keep it safe." The girl stepped forward, placed the toy gently on the bench beside the door, and gave it one last look. A look not of loss, but of peace. Then she turned, her guardian's arm guiding her into the rain. Outside, the sky had opened again, not with fury this time, but with a soft drizzle that painted the city in muted silver. The air smelled clean, new, as if the storm had taken something dark with it when it passed. Ethan walked out into the gray afternoon, his hands tucked into his coat pockets. Rex waited by the patrol car, rain dotting his fur. The dog's posture was calm, proud, the kind of stillness that only came after a battle hard fought and won. Ethan stopped beside him, both man and dog staring up at the overcast sky. The courthouse behind them loomed silent, its cold stone face softened by the falling rain. "We did good, huh?" Ethan said quietly. Rex tilted his head, ears twitching at the sound of his voice. Then, with a small movement, he nudged Ethan's hand with his nose, firm, reassuring, as if to say, "We did what needed to be done." Ethan chuckled softly, the sound breaking through the damp air. "Yeah," he murmured. "We did." They stood there for a long while. No rush, no orders, no chaos. Just rain, and silence, and the faint hum of distant traffic, blending with the heartbeat of the city. That had seen too much. When they finally returned to the precinct, the world felt quieter. The hum of the fluorescent lights was gentler. The footsteps, fewer, everything, smelled faintly of coffee and wet pavement. Ethan walked down the hall toward his office, Rex padding beside him, their shadows stretching long across the linoleum floor. On his desk sat a single manila folder, marked "Closed Case" in red ink. Next to it lay the small, worn rabbit, Lila's gift. Ethan picked it up carefully, brushing his thumb over the patched seams. The fabric was softer than he expected, carrying a faint scent of lavender soap. "She said you could keep it," Ethan said, glancing at Rex. Rex, sitting near the desk, gave a low huff and wagged his tail once, a solemn acceptance. Ethan smiled. "Yeah, thought so." He crossed the room to the corner where Rex's bed sat, a worn police blanket folded neatly inside an old crate. Setting the toy down there, he adjusted it gently, as though making sure it would be comfortable. The sight was unexpectedly tender, the battle-hardened K9 resting beside a child's toy, two symbols of innocence and courage intertwined. Ethan sat down heavily in his chair, elbows on his knees, and exhaled a long, shaky breath. For weeks he had carried the weight of this case like a stone in his chest. Now, with the truth laid bare, and the child safe, all that was left was the hollow space where tension used to live. Rex shifted slightly, curling around the toy. His nose rested near it, his breathing slow and steady. Ethan watched him for a moment, his vision blurring. The rain outside tapped softly against the window, a rhythmic lullaby for tired souls. He leaned back in his chair, whispering more to himself than anyone else. "You did it, buddy. You really did." His voice cracked on the last word. He reached down, brushing his hand through Rex's fur. The dog's eyes flicked open for a second, meeting his gaze, warm, loyal, knowing, before closing again. Ethan felt the sting of tears, not from sadness, but from release. All the sleepless nights, the doubt, the frustration, they all washed away in that quiet moment between man and dog. Outside, the rain continued, soft but steady, the kind of rain that didn't cleanse so much as heal. And inside that small precinct office, under the hum of tired lights, a detective and his K9 partner sat in silence. Two souls bound by duty, loss, and the quiet triumph of finding truth where no one else could. The rabbit toy lay between them, its stitches catching the faint light, like a scar turned into something beautiful, a reminder that even broken things can carry courage. Ethan's voice, barely a whisper, broke the stillness. "Rest easy, partner." Rex stirred, lifting his head just enough to press it against Ethan's knee. For the first time in months, Ethan smiled, not the weary kind, but one filled with peace. The case was closed, The child was safe, and somewhere beyond the rain, the city felt just a little lighter. Late autumn painted the suburbs in gold and rust, as Ethan Cole drove past the maple-lined road, the city fading behind him. 3 months had passed since the trial, since the little girl's truth had finally been heard. The world had moved on, but not Ethan. Some cases stayed with you. He parked at a white house with a porch swing swaying in the wind. From the backyard came the sound of laughter, bright, innocent, healing. Rex jumped down beside him, tail wagging once, slow and content. At the door, the foster mother greeted him with a warm smile. "She's been waiting all week," she said. "She laughs again, sleeps through the night. She's a different child now." That alone loosened something heavy in his chest. In the yard, beneath a maple tree shedding orange leaves, Lila sat coloring on a picnic blanket. When she turned and saw him, she ran full speed into his arms. "Ethan!" He hugged her tight. "Hey, kiddo. You look taller." "That's 'cause I eat all my veggies now," she giggled. Then she saw Rex. "Rex!" She knelt, hugging the dog as he licked her cheek. Her laughter, light, unafraid, filled the air. "Is he okay?" she asked. "He misses you," Ethan said. "Still checks the door every morning. Maybe he misses my Coco." "Yeah, maybe," Ethan smiled. They sat together in the golden quiet. Then Lila handed him a folded paper. "I made you something." It was a drawing. 3 figures under a crayon blue sky. A man, a little girl, and a brown dog. Above them, in uneven letters, "My family of braves." Ethan's throat tightened. "It's beautiful. Can I keep it?" "It's for you and Rex, so you don't forget me." "Oh, kid," he whispered. "We could never forget you." The foster mother called her in for dinner. Lila hugged him once more, kissed Rex on the nose. "Bye, brave boy." Then she ran toward the porch, laughter echoing through the yard. Ethan watched her go, feeling the last of the weight lift from his chest. "You did good, partner," he murmured. Rex looked up, those steady amber eyes, saying everything words couldn't. As they drove back toward the city, the horizon blushed with violet and gold. The drawing sat on the dashboard, glowing softly in the dusk. "You didn't just find evidence," Ethan said quietly. "You found her voice." Rex gave a low, contented rumble. The road stretched ahead, long, open, forgiving. Ethan rested one hand on the wheel, the other scratching Rex's ear. The wind carried the scent of pine and rain, and for the first time in years, peace settled in his chest. He glanced at the drawing again. Blue sky, yellow dress, brown fur, and smiled. "Yeah," he whispered. "We're her family of braves." Rex barked once, deep and sure, and the world, for a fleeting moment, felt whole again. In the end, stories like Ethan and Rex's remind us of something timeless, that love doesn't always need words, and loyalty doesn't ask for recognition. German shepherds, and so many dogs like them, carry a kind of quiet courage that can hold our hearts steady when life feels too heavy. They don't just serve, they stay. They listen when no one else can. And sometimes, they're the reason we find our way back to hope. If you've ever looked into your dog's eyes and felt that unspoken understanding, that sense that they somehow know, maybe this is the right time to nurture that bond a little deeper. There's a resource I've found helpful for building stronger, more loving communication with our dogs. It's gentle, practical, and rooted in respect. You can take a look whenever you feel ready. No rush, no pitch, just something worth exploring, from one dog lover to another. Because sometimes, the best thing we can give them is the same loyalty they've given us all along.